In the shadowy corners of medieval medicine, where science collided with superstition and the line between physician and mystic blurred, one of the strangest practices flourished for centuries. Uroscopy, the art of diagnosing disease by inspecting and, sometimes tasting urine. To modern minds, the notion of a doctor sipping a patient's urine may sound like something out of a grotesque parody. But in medieval Europe, and even in earlier ancient cultures, it was deadly serious business. Doctors were revered for their skill in reading the color, clarity, consistency, and even flavor of urine. They held flasks of golden liquid to the light, like sommeliers with a fine wine, and declared judgments that could determine life or death. This was not a fringe method. It was mainstream, respected, and written into medical textbooks. For a very long time, your urine was your medical chart. Before stethoscopes and blood tests, before x-rays and mysteries, doctors had few tools to understand what was happening inside the human body. They had to rely on what the body produced: its waste, fluids, and odd smells. And among all these indicators, urine held a special status. It was considered a direct window into the balance of the bodies for humors. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, according to Hippocratic and Galenic theory. The entire medical worldview for centuries revolved around keeping these humors in equilibrium. Urine was a convenient and consistent output that could supposedly reflect their state. If you were ill, your doctor did not ask you to open your mouth and say. He asked you to urinate into a specially designed glass flask called a matula. The matula was a round-bottomed flask with a narrow neck, shaped in such a way that it allowed for clear observation of sediment, foam, and separation of layers in the urine. Physicians carried these flasks with pride. Some even wore them around their belts, signaling their profession like a badge of honor. Medical students were taught to interpret the various hues and consistencies, often referring to detailed color charts. Urine that was pale and clear might indicate a cold, wet imbalance, perhaps too much phlegm. Dark, reddish urine could signify excess heat or a feverish temperament, maybe due to too much blood. Milky urine might hint at a blockage or kidney problem. Foamy urine, possibly something wrong with the lungs. But while sight and smell were commonly used senses in the diagnostic process, the taste test was not as rare as you might hope. In some cases, particularly in diagnosing diabetes, melitoswitch literally means sweet siphon. Physicians would taste a small amount of urine to detect its sugar content. They were not imagining things. Diabetes does cause excess glucose to spill into the urine, and it really does taste sweet. Some medical texts even instructed doctors on how to distinguish different illnesses based on the sweetness or bitterness of the sample. If it sounds primitive, that's because it was, but it was also surprisingly perceptive. Diagnosing diabetes in this way predates modern testing by centuries. And these weren't just quack doctors working out of forest huts. Some of the most respected medical scholars of the time, including Avicenna in the Islamic world and Hildegard of Bingen in medieval. Europe wrote about the importance of urine analysis. In fact, medieval uroscopy was so respected that even without seeing the patient, a doctor could provide a diagnosis based solely on a messenger delivering a urine sample. Entire medical consultations were conducted by courier, with someone traveling miles to a learned physician's house carrying a tightly stoppered flask. The physician would inspect, perhaps sniff, perhaps sip, and write back with a prescription. There were problems with this system, of course. Out context, age, sex, diet, or symptoms, the diagnosis was often guesswork dressed in scholarly robes. But patients often believed it wholeheartedly. They would gaze with reverence as the doctor lifted the matula to the sunlight, swirling it gently, peering with concentration, and muttering his conclusions. The ritual itself was part of the healing. The symbolism of taking something private and visceral or inand, turning it into a tool of knowledge, gave the process a mysterious power. It was medicine mingled with performance. Like all things in history, the practice of uroscopy evolved and eventually declined. Particularly with the arrival of more accurate methods in the Renaissance and Enlightenment eras, scientific advances began to expose the weaknesses in humor theory, anatomy lessons, dissections. And experiments revealed that the body was not governed by vaporous fluids and balance, but by organs, cells, and chemical reactions. Still, uroscopy lingered. It remained part of medical education well into the 17th century. And folk healers kept the practice alive in some rural areas for even longer. Old habits die hard, especially when they are wrapped in centuries of tradition and authority. It is easy to laugh at medieval doctors with their flasks and charts and their unfortunate taste tests. But before we mock them too much, we should remember that they were doing the best they could with what they had. They were working in an age without microscopes, antibiotics, or a basic understanding of germs. Their methods may seem crude, even disgusting, but they were often grounded in careful observation and trial. Some of their insights, like using urine to detect sugar, were spot on, even if they lacked the language or tools to explain why. There is also something deeply human about this chapter in medical history. The idea that healing begins with listening closely to the body's most unassuming outputs reminds us that medicine is not always high-tech. It is observation, empathy, pattern recognition, and sometimes an act of faith. For a medieval patient who was too sick to speak, who lacked access to hospitals or physicians, a little flask of warm urine might be their only voice. And for the doctor, peering into that flask, trying to make sense of a life hanging in the balance, it was an act of desperate sincerity. Some apothecaries and physicians even developed urine color wheels charts, showing various shades from pale, lemon to burnt orange and beyond, with each color linked to a specific condition or imbalance. There were rules for when to collect the urine, ideally in the morning, and how to transport it without contamination. Medical handbooks offered extensive classifications. Was the urine cloudy or clear? Did it smell sweet or putrid? Was there sediment that settled to the bottom or floated in mysterious suspension? These details were more than curiosities. They were keys to the inner workings of the body. Interestingly, some of the language around urine in medical texts was poetic. Doctors would describe bubbles of the spirit in the urine, or earthy dregs, or misty vapors. The flask became a mystical globe in which the entire human condition could be read, like a wizard's orb. This symbolic connection made urine diagnosis not just a practical tool, but a philosophical one. Health was harmony, disease was disharmony. And urine was a messenger from within, whispering truths to the trained listener. Of course, as knowledge expanded, so did criticism. Satirists of the Enlightenment poked fun at physicians who relied too heavily on pee. Cartoons depicted doctors greedily sniffing flasks, while ignoring the dying patient in front of them. Playwrights mocked them in comedies. But even then, the roots of uroscopy clung to medicine. Even now, in the modern age of clinical labs and digital diagnostics, we still analyze urine. We just use machines instead of tongues. Dipsticks and spectrometry have replaced taste tests and color wheels. But the core idea remains. Your body reveals its secrets in the most mundane places. In a strange way, the medieval PTasters were the ancestors of today's lab technicians. They were not perverse, just determined. They bent close to the edge of discomfort to glean the faintest clue. Their methods were flawed, yes, and sometimes unhygienic or misinformed, but their goal was to understand, to help, to heal. So next time you hand over a sterile plastic cup at a clinic and wait for results, consider the long, strange history that brought you to that moment. Consider the centuries of physicians who looked, sniffed, and even sipped to understand the hidden languages of the human body. They walked so modern medicine could run. And if you feel a wave of gratitude that your doctor does not taste your urine today, you are not alone. Thanks for taking this wild, eye-opening journey through one of history's strangest medical practices. Who would have thought that your pee once held the key to your life or death diagnosis, and that doctors not only inspected it, but sometimes actually tasted it? As bizarre as it sounds today, urine diagnosis was once a trusted method used by some of the most respected minds in medicine. These early doctors were working with what they had, using every sense available to uncover the mysteries of the human body. It may seem gross now, but their determination helped pave the way for the scientific breakthroughs we rely on today. If this glimpse into the weird world of medieval medicine made you raise your eyebrows, chuckle, or even squirm a little, you're not alone. History is full of moments that are equal parts fascinating and revolting, and that's what makes it worth exploring. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, so you never miss another strange chapter from the past. Leave a comment if you'd ever heard of this practice before, or if you want us to dive into another weird corner of history. Until next time, stay curious and maybe keep your pee to yourself.